Advertising is dead, it's dying, it's on its deathbed. This is what we've been hearing about since the advent of the internet. But here we are in 2019, where ads are everywhere, a little more than we'd actually like. Welcome to yet another episode of ABTV's Crossfire Debate, and today we will be dissecting the ad industry in the region and globally.
When it comes to the Gulf, there's so much generic advertising, it's hard for something to stick in my head.
And I think that is what is killing creativity.
But is it a brand's place, a commercial entity's place to take that stand? Welcome to the show. So how many of y'all here think that advertisements have a huge impact on your buying decisions? Show of hands, please. Thanks so much for joining us here, and thank you for joining us here on the sets. We have Fatima Shaikh from Radix and we have Alex Malouf from Procter & Gamble. So I'm going to start with you, Fatima. Do you think creativity in advertising as of now is dead?
No.
And why do you think that is?
I think the definition of creativity has changed. I think for the longest of time, people have kind of connected creativity to TVCs and 30-second storyboard. And I think that's why, you always hear this conversation, is creativity dead? And people are usually thinking of the last ad they remember and they go like, oh yeah, it's dead. Because they don't usually think of any ads they remember. But I think creativity is now, has obviously evolved. It has changed because the platforms have changed, the formats have changed, and people, and there's been a complete evolution in our consumption. So no, creativity is not dead. I think it has evolved and it's in different forms.
All right, Fatima, you obviously have a very optimistic view about the creativity and where the industry is going towards. Alex, coming to you, you told me yesterday that you thought creativity was dead, especially in this region. Why was that?
I think the challenge we have, you look around the world, there are so many amazing campaigns. You look at Nike, for example, in the US, brilliant campaign, we'd all remember it. When it comes to the Gulf, there's so much generic advertising, it's hard for something to stick in my head. And I think this is the issue we have here. The creativity is, it's almost copied from one brand to the other. We're not looking at how we can distinguish each brand in the market. And look, it's not easy trying to come up with a creative campaign or something which really inspires. But at the end of the day, everything today is a commodity.
Right.
Everything is. And so what you want in terms of advertising your creative, you want it to stick out. So
what kind of creativity are you talking about? What should brands do?
Well, one example we talked about was purpose campaigns, purpose advertising, which I've seen all over. I've seen in Europe, I've seen in the US, I've seen in Asia. It's the one thing, though, I don't see here. I don't see brands going out there and saying, we're going to support this cause.
So I've got all of these campaigns that made headlines in the last couple of years. So they're all very, very iconic campaigns that got mixed reaction. But one of the common themes in all of this is purpose, like you mentioned. Yes. So they're all social adverts, essentially. But my question, Fatima, I'll ask you this first. Do you think it's a brand's place to take a social stand, considering not all of them got it right? We know what happened with the Pepsi Kendall Jenner ad. They didn't get it right. Gillette, there was mixed reactions, of course. And then Nike obviously did a good job. Their sales increased by $6 billion. So they did a good job. But is it a brand's place, a commercial entity's place to take that stand?
Of course it is. I think, when you look at brands and the journey they go through, the first step is, of course, brand building, and it starts with the product. But eventually, it has to lead to purpose. And I think especially when you look at, media and how media has evolved and how, digital has become such an integral part of our lives, each one of us over here feels we have a voice, all right? And each one of us feels that voice has a purpose. And they expect the same from the brands. So to answer your question, do brands have to deliver in this space? The answer is yes. I think the question then is the extent. And what voice are you really adopting? So you rightly said, Nike did brilliantly well because it was extremely relevant, at that time with everything that was taking place in US.
Yeah.
But with Pepsi, I think probably, in my humble opinion, I think where they probably got it wrong was the choice of the person who was voicing this purpose. Because she does come across as somebody who's quite entitled. So is she really the right person to bring this message across?
Also, the approach itself was very shallow and narrow, right? When
Absolutely.
it comes to the
but
ad.
I think just her, she kind of took over and she empowered, she really, it was only her.
Alex, but my question is, how much creativity is too much creativity? So now with all of these adverts that we see on screen, obviously there is a huge purpose, but do you think the purpose or the entire story is overpowering the brand itself and what the brand wants to convey? Let me just give you an example. 80% of Super Bowl ads fail to increase sales of their product, a number far higher than the non-Super Bowl failure rate of 60%. So now the same report by Communicus said that the main reason why this is happening is because the ads were way too creative. So people remember the ad, they just don't see the brand. They don't remember what brand it is. So do you think too much creativity can also be a problem?
No, there's a fine line. You've got to be creative, but you'll still have your big mission of brand building, of essentially pushing product. That's what we're trying to do. We're not there to create a series. We're not there to create a new program or a movie. We've got to think about how we best get a message across. That could be through purpose. It could be through the other big piece is engagement. And this is what we're seeing, again, from brands outside of the region. And this is what we need to do more of here. We need to see brands engaging with their audiences.
Right.
Those who are advocates and also as well those who are detractors. But we're still taking the traditional approach of pushing out a message, but not having a conversation.
Right.
Which again, it's really got to change, because unless we make, first of all, advertising more creative and also more effective, then advertising will lose its impact. And the money that we're spending will go to waste.
Yeah, of course. The whole question of ROI, which is why I'm just going to come back to this point for another conversation, which is how we started this debate about consumer buying decision and the impact that it has on it. So 40% is still a strong number compared to, when it's the non-Super Bowl ads having 40% impact is not bad at all. But when you talk about regions outside of the US, do you think you see the same impact? For example, the Middle East, North Africa region, you take the subcontinent or Western Europe, for example. Do you see that sort of impact that ads have?
Television ads and creativity and purchasing decision, I think advertising does have an impact, because also we need to understand a consumer goes through a passive to active phase in their decision making. And there are multiple influences in that journey. And advertising can play an interesting role in that journey, from the passive to the active.
Right.
And creativity can play a very interesting role too. So I think advertising and creativity.
So it's probably the nudge that you're talking about, that advertisements or
the nudge, the pull, the push.
Great.
Everything.
So what do you think? Does it have the same kind of impact in this region and in other parts of the world outside of the US?
So everything begins with the consumer, with the audience. So what are the consumers here doing? What are they active on? Where are they active? Obviously here, digital plays a huge role in consumers. You look at the social media statistics. For example, you look at Saudi with the likes of YouTube, with Snapchat, with Instagram. And this is why we've seen the rise of influencer marketing come into the mix.
Right. Sorry, what's your take on that? I have to ask.
Influencer marketing is...
I'm interested also.
is an interesting one. Look, for me, I think advertisers, first of all, have to be very transparent, no matter what channel they go through. Influencer marketing is very useful in many ways, but again, we've got to be creative when you work with influencers, but also as well, we've got to be very clear with our consumers that this is paid for content.
Yeah.
But even if you look at the likes of Netflix today, if you look at other big brands who are now going into streaming, there's many different ways that you can reach out to consumers. You think back to my own company, we came up with a concept of advertising on radio. So we had soap operas.
Right.
So advertising will constantly update and adapt itself. And that's what smart brands need to think about. How are you going to adapt to what your consumers are doing? So how are you going to be able to engage where they are rather than where you think they are? And often brands are very much stuck, in this region at least, as to thinking about certain channels and certain channels alone?
Of course. So I think both of y'all are in agreement when it comes to the evolution that is required in this industry.
Absolutely.
And both of y'all think that this industry requires a revamp, essentially, right? So now just going back to traditional adverts, one of the most influential adverts, and this is a personal opinion, when it comes to translating to sales was chewing gum ads. So I'm not sure how many of y'all know this, but from the time that chewing gum ads started coming to the mainstream, the sales increased twice, the sales doubled. And the only reason was the way it was consumed in the ad, where the protagonist would take 2 tablets or 2 chewing gum sticks. And subconsciously, I started doing that. And that was a tangible impact. And this is a very traditional, very, very basic ad that we call. But we don't see that sort of impact happening right now, do we? Unless it's one of those blown out of proportion, huge, larger than life ad, right?
Yes, I think I would agree on that, because I think, again, you started your presentation with the amount of pieces, content pieces, advertising pieces we all encounter on a day-to-day. So there's only so much impact, one ad or one creative will have on you. You're obviously talking of a time when you probably saw 5 or 10 ads a day, and that's why it stayed with you.
Yeah.
But I think currently, I'm sure everybody in this room, you've already seen more than 50 ads since morning in some form or the other. And if I was to ask you, can you name the top 3, you're going to struggle. So I think it's just the sheer number, which is kind of working against creativity, impact, and recall.
Right. So then what would you suggest as a solution? Should we not be putting out as many ads?
Wow, I think that would mean then I have to change my career. Well, I don't think the answer is not to put out so many ads. I think it is about, where you want to speak to them and how you want to speak to them.
Just again, going back to the chewing gum example, the whole purpose of ad, correct me if I'm wrong, is sales. It has to translate into sales.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, the speech, the headlines, and people talking about it is a huge aspect, but then what brands want is the numbers, right? When it comes to the figures, the dollar sign.
Absolutely.
Is that happening with ads today?
It's very easy till today to go and buy data and then go and send out a message. But it's not effective at all. But it takes time to understand your consumer base, what your consumer is looking for, and then put in the right tech and the processes to get them the information, which is going to help you build your brand and then shift products.
But okay, so you're obviously talking from a brand perspective, from a product perspective, but as a consumer, I don't want to give you that data, but you're still taking my data for your benefit.
Yeah, but you will do if what you're receiving is relevant to you.
Right.
So it could be, for example, a mom who needs to move diaper sizes. Getting that information on time, that is a lifesaver.
Right.
It could even be a dad. I'm not just to say mum. I'll say dad as well. Yeah. If you're being spammed every other day by products you're not interested in, then of course you're going to block the brand. You're going to go and put in an ad blocker. You're going to go and subscribe to something like YouTube Premium where you don't see any more ads.
Yeah.
But if brands do it smart, if they take the data they have and if they build up customer profiles and get the right information to them, so basically personalization, the impact of that is phenomenal.
I'm going to come to the first point you mentioned here, spamming, basically. So the average person gets bombarded with over 1,700 banner ads per month, but only see half of them, right? Which is, again, a huge number. And you mentioned earlier that you think the number is much higher than that. I'm not sure if you agree, but consumers right now are fed up of all of these ads, just seeing so many ads being popped up everywhere. We're being spammed by it, and it's intruding into our lives, and we don't want it. So basically, there's no demand, but there is an oversupply, essentially. That's not good for the ad industry now, is it?
It's not. Because I think, obviously the relevancy is gone. And obviously, as much as I'm from the advertising industry, I'm also a consumer, and as a consumer, we all hit a threshold when it comes to the kind of content and the data and the information that's fed into us. So I think there is a big need for correction. I'm all in for correction. And I think we need to understand and use the data to deliver the right message in the right number.
Right.
I think the right number is something I think we all need to come together. Brands need to come together. Specialists like us, we need to come together and agree on what that number should be, and how much is too much and how much is perfect and good.
But at this stage, because of this extreme bombardment of ad, like you saw on screen, as a consumer, I don't want any ads, which is why ad blocking softwares are becoming so prevalent right now. In fact, adoption of desktop ad blockers has risen steadily in recent years from 21 million users in 2010 to 181 million users this year. So there's this whole movement towards ad blocking, and with Apple joining that entire race of ad blocking and accepting it, one of the biggest advertisers, it's just becoming, the software itself is becoming more on the mainstream. So do you think that could mark the end of the industry, or at least the beginning of the end of the industry?
Advertising is always going to adapt. It's always going to find a way. You look at influencer marketing. It's found a way to engage with content creators who have come about because of our digital lifestyle, because of the social media platforms. But it still comes down to creativity and effectiveness. If I deliver to you information that you find useful, you are going to act on that information. If I deliver to you a piece of information which is basically spam, which has no relevance to you, then you're going to see it as a nuisance.
Right.
And that's not what you want. It's not what an advertiser wants or an agency. So we've got to be much more creative, effective, think about the right channels, but at the end of the day, understand our consumers. The better we understand them, the more impactful we can be. And the more you and others will find advertising is actually useful, rather than being a nuisance.
Right. Then you're talking about the evolution of the whole industry, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. What's happening today is ad blocking softwares are becoming more and more relevant. I have them on my phone right now, on the desktop right now. So do you think that could be a huge challenge for the industry you're in?
It is, and I think that's why when Google, Facebook, and Apple have in fact come together, and they have created a consortium where they're introducing guidelines for advertisers to follow in order to create ads that can pass through these ad blockers. So there's in fact already a body that has been put in place. And these are steps towards, really working around ad blocking apps and of course putting the responsibility back on the brands and creative agencies. And I think I agree with you. Context is very important. And, we always say this, that, unless and until you're not contextually relevant to the consumer, don't create that piece of content or
right.
that ad.
Now I'm just going to come to the whole context debate that you've been mentioning, and now you've also mentioned it. So this is basically you're trying to provide information that's relevant to consumers. But the way it's being done right now is horrible, right? Like with Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, we saw that 87 million users' private information was compromised just so it could be provided to advertising agencies. And that is unethical, but from what you said, that is what the ad industry or brands need to do.
Now, a lot of big brands are taking a stance against this. In the FMCG industry, for example, they're taking the lead. They're saying very clearly, we want to be transparent. We will only essentially work with people who are transparent. We will not work with people who are unethical or agencies, anybody else who's part of the process. This is what we've got to do as an industry. We've got to think ethically. We've got to think about how we engage on certain big issues as well, and create advertising which we would be proud of if we were a consumer.
Right. So now, with regards to ad agencies, how are you planning on reaching consumers who are A, blocking your ads, B, don't want to give you the information that you will require to give to your brands and to your clients, essentially? How do you plan on reaching them?
I think there are constantly new tools that are available. And yes, I agree, there are ad blocking tools, but then there are also other avenues that crop up that give you an opportunity to engage with the consumer.
Right.
So influencer marketing is a classic example, where the humanizing of the conversation is enabling brands to have a better connect with the consumer.
But what's happening globally is a programmatic advertising, which is like exactly the opposite of that. They're automating it. They're using artificial intelligence, AR, VR, XR to just improve experiences, etc. Do you think that could somehow be the future in this region to just improve the ad experiences for consumers?
Tech is one way of doing it, and tech allows us to better understand what consumers are doing when they're doing it. You think about the number of devices you have, the number of websites you go to, the number of social media platforms you want. There is no way one single person is able to trace that journey. And if AI and other tech tools can help us better understand consumers, then that's a great thing. But I'll step back for a moment. Tech can't be as creative as a person. We have got to lead the push for creativity. We've got to be braver in terms of creativity as well in the region. And I was saying before, in terms of purpose, we've got to think about what we can do as brands to support positive change for consumers. You know, we've got to be part of the solution for many of the issues around us rather than being seen as part of the problem.
But again, from the business angle, so I think just this year, the digital ad spending, digital alone, was $333 billion globally. So it's twice that when you take the entire ad sphere. Where is the return though? What is the return on investment? Do people actually use ads and let ads influence their buying and purchasing decisions? Do you see a clear return on investment?
I think, again, it comes down to the metrics and the KPIs and what formats you're employing. So I think all ads are not just about creating awareness. There are a lot of ads that are about creating leads. There are a lot of ads that are about acquisition, and they have a very clear consumer journey, which shows you the ROI and, you know, what you're really, and I think there has been a lot of improvement, you know, on those metrics and KPIs and mapping, you know, the journey.
So then at this juncture, is the purpose of an ad to convey a message, a social message, which is where everyone is going towards to create an impact, or is it to bring the numbers, to bring the money in?
I think it's about adding value. And I think the value can then be in the form of a transaction. The value could be in form of a message or a purpose, or it could be in an action, an engagement that you're looking for.
Would you agree?
At the end of the day, we want to build brands. We want to build awareness. We want to change people's behaviors and attitudes. And we also as well want to promote sales. Yeah. That's the simplicity of advertising. And when it's done very, very well, it can transform a business when it's done well. When it's not done well, it doesn't have as much impact. So we've got to think, how can we make advertising so good that people actually look at it positively?
Unfortunately, we don't have an answer for this region for this yet, but we do have time for questions from the audience. So is there anybody with a question for us? Sure.
I had a question about, again, because let's take a company, for example, as Procter & Gamble. You're talking about the innovation of ads. And I wanted to ask, like, I'm 20, I'm 18, so I've been seeing, I've been seeing the same ads for, let's say, detergents for 2 decades. And you're talking about the ads need to be innovative and they need to be new to reach audiences. But I've been seeing the same ads for 20 years. And I just wanted to ask, when companies do that and they keep the same idea of the concept of the ad for 20 years, is it because they're risk averse, or is it because they're just lazy? Or is it they just want to see the same thing because people are just giving them the results that they want? What is it actually that keeps people doing these same ads for years?
Look, it's impact. If the ad concept is working, you'll see the concept being reused. It's as simple as that. But even then, with brands which are seen as traditional, you are seeing a shift. So for example, with the brands you're referring to, what we're doing now in markets like the subcontinent is looking at tackling big issues. It could be gender equality. It could be the role that men play at home to balance family life. So brands do evolve because it's only natural. Advertising has to evolve as well. And good brand managers understand the need for brands to change alongside their audience.
Right, it's very interesting he asked this question. He's, again, an 18-year-old from Middlesex University. He's an ad student. So now, how are brands like that, these older brands, trying to appeal to that generation, which is the future, the cohort, the millennials that everyone is talking about? He found that ad boring. He just mentioned it. So something needs to be done, right, to appeal to them.
So in fact, one of the most popular ads of Super Bowl last year was the Tide ad. And I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see that ad. I would encourage you to have a look at that ad. And I think it's talking to you.
First of all, a detergent ad is not going to appeal to you anyway. To be frank, you're not our main audience for detergents. But if you look, for example, at Old Spice. So Old Spice was seen as a very traditional brand. Look at what the work which they've done in the US over the past, say, 10 years with Terry Crews and others. Brilliantly brought to life, made modern, and you've seen how the brand has changed and adapted, but it takes guts to do that as a brand manager.
The only ad I can remember from this region is the Emirates NBD ad, Wasn't Me. That was memorable, it had a clear message, and it also made sense, it wasn't going away from the brand.
Relevant, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else with a question? Sure.
Hi. So you just spoke about budgets, and we're talking about how creativity. I find in this region, I work in ad sales, and I find that creativity is an issue when it comes to clients. So if they have the budgets, and we're talking about the banks and everything, why aren't they creative? Are they working with the wrong creative agencies? I worked in the UK in media, and we used to work with incredible creative agencies. You talk about the US and how creative they are. What's wrong with the people that they're working with here? Is it the creative agency, or is it the client, or is it the audience?
Look, I'm on the brand side. Everything has got to begin from us, from the brands. You've got to have brand managers who, first of all, know their audiences really well, and two, are willing to take risks. What I often find is, if I look at markets like Egypt, or even markets in the Gulf like Kuwait or Saudi, there's more awareness of the consumer base. There's more familiarity. And there's also more of a willingness to go and do something different, take a risk, try a new channel, try a new creative. There's one telco in Saudi which closed all of its branches for one day. Just something incredibly powerful. And that was brave. That was really gutsy. We have a lot of money being spent in this country, but we're not seeing as much risk-taking here. We're not seeing people willing to be as creative. And I think that's something which has to change if we're going to have effective advertising. Because otherwise, what kills advertising quicker than anything else is mediocrity.
Yeah, but just adding on to Sally's point again, native advertising, if you go elsewhere, they'll say it's so 2014, it's so 2012. But over here, it's just been, it's been averse to, or the market has been averse to native advertising because it's considered a risk, because they're not sure if the consumers are ready for an ad like that. So is that also a challenge for you when it comes to the ad agency, when you have ideas, but the brands are afraid that the message won't reach us, the consumers?
So I think where it gets defeated is when they go through the whole process of understanding native advertising and they end the conversation by saying, so when will they know about my product?
Yeah.
Boom. It gets defeated. Because the whole purpose of native advertising is to take them through the brand experience and not necessarily talk about the product.
Yeah. But also platforms, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right now we're talking about YouTube, Facebook, adverts there are more prevalent. But retention on those platforms is 3 seconds. So how are you going to convey your advertisement's message in just 3 seconds before it flips to the content?
I think you'll need another session for that, because I think that's something, personally, I'm against. And I think that is what is killing creativity. Being time-bound.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, you can just about get one line in 3 seconds. You can't create brand experience. You can't pass information. You can't add value. So I don't think I'd like to go in that direction right now, because that's a different conversation. But yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done on native advertising in this part of the world. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
But
you.
I'm going to come back to the question again that I asked in the beginning of the session. How many of y'all are influenced by the advertisements that you see on screen when it comes to your purchasing and buying decisions? All right, thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for joining us in the session, and thank you for watching ABTV's Crossfire Debate. We will be back again next week. Do advertisements impact your buying decision? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and the best 2 comments get to be on our show next week. Thanks for watching ABTV's Crossfire Debate, and of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like, follow and comment on this video.